On September 2nd, 2025, a day that would reshape military law in America, President Trump authorized the Navy to do something unprecedented. A missile struck a speedboat in the Caribbean. 11 people died in seconds. No arrest, no investigation, no trial. Just a video posted on social media as proof. By November, the count had risen to 76 deaths across 19 strikes. 0 people prosecuted, 0 court proceedings. Welcome to America's new war, not declared by Congress, not bound by traditional rules of engagement, but unleashed with the authority of a single pen. This is the story of how a drug interdiction campaign became something far more controversial, and how the world watched as the Navy turned Caribbean waters into an execution ground. To understand how we got here, we need to rewind 6 months. In January 2025, President Trump signed Executive Order 14157, a directive that would reshape how America wages war on drugs. This order gave the State Department sweeping power to label Western Hemisphere drug cartels as foreign terrorist organizations. By February, the administration had designated Tren de Aragua, a Venezuelan criminal gang, MS-13, and 6 Mexico-based organizations as foreign terrorists. On the surface, this was anti-narcotics policy. Underneath, it was a legal lever. By classifying traffickers as terrorists, the administration had reactivated a legal framework that hadn't been seriously deployed since 2001, the War on Terror Authorization. That same authority that justified drone strikes in Yemen and Iraq would now justify missile strikes in the Caribbean. In August 2025, Navy warships began quietly assembling. The USS Iwo Jima and its amphibious ready group arrived first, then reconnaissance drones to Puerto Rico. By late August, 7 U.S. warships and 1 nuclear attack submarine were positioned off South America. More than 4,500 sailors and Marines were ready. The stated mission? Counter-narcotics interdiction. But the military assets being deployed raised a different question entirely. Why would you need an aircraft carrier to stop drug boats? The first strike. September 2nd, 2025. A speedboat allegedly transporting cocaine from Venezuela approaches the Caribbean. The Navy had been tracking it. A missile finds its mark. The vessel explodes. 11 people are dead. Trump posts a video, grainy, confirming the strike. He calls them Tren de Aragua narco-terrorists. He claims they were carrying enough drugs to kill 25,000 to 50,000 people. But here's what didn't happen. No arrest warrant, no interrogation, no forensic analysis of the cargo, and no trial. The Pentagon later says it has classified intelligence proving narco-terrorism, but the public gets no evidence, no names of those killed, no identification of their bodies, no due process. Venezuela disputes the claim. Interior Minister Diosdado Cabello says the 11 were fishermen. Colombian investigators claim some victims were from Colombia. The video Trump released doesn't show a large quantity of drugs, just floating packages. But the bureaucracy had already moved. In a letter to Congress, the Pentagon made an extraordinary claim. The U.S. was now in an armed conflict with designated drug cartels. Those killed were unlawful combatants. And under wartime rules of engagement, the military didn't need judicial review to strike again. They had the legal authority to kill without trial.
Escalation. What followed was a campaign unlike anything the U.S. Navy had done in peacetime. September 15th, 4 days later, another strike. 3 dead. No evidence shown. No investigation. October. Hegseth announces a strike in the Pacific. 4 dead. Then 6 more in the Caribbean. Then 3 more. The videos get released in quick succession, each one a grainy confirmation of death, each announcement a new body count. By late October, the pace accelerated. On October 27th alone, the Pentagon conducted 3 separate strikes across 4 vessels. 14 people died. 1 survivor was found, but presumed dead after a Mexican Navy search. The other two survivors, from Ecuador and Colombia, were briefly detained by U.S. forces and then released to their home countries. The administration was now claiming that each boat strike saved 25,000 to 50,000 American lives. No evidence supported this calculation, but the narrative had been established. Every dead person was a narco-terrorist. Every strike prevented a fentanyl epidemic. The intelligence question. Here's what's remarkable. The Pentagon has never released a single name of those killed. No identification, no proof of cargo, no forensic analysis, no court documents, just announcements. Experts began asking uncomfortable questions. Stephen Bannon, a conservative Trump confidant, warned that this looked like past forever wars. The American conservative called it an avoidable catastrophe. Congressional Democrats sent a letter saying the Trump administration provided no legitimate legal justification for the strikes. Senator Jack Reed, a ranking Democrat on the Armed Services Committee, said plainly, "The U.S. military is not empowered to hunt down suspected criminals and kill them without trial." But here's the legal trap the administration had sprung. By labeling the targets as designated terrorist organizations, they'd activated a different legal framework entirely. The Authorization for Use of Military Force from 2001, written after 9/11 for conflicts in Afghanistan and Iraq, was now being applied to drug cartels in the Caribbean. The same law that justified rendition, the same law that justified indefinite detention, now it justified death without trial at sea. The real story emerges. As intelligence leaks began to circulate, a different narrative emerged. Governments and families of the deceased began speaking. The Guardian reported that many of those killed were fishermen, not cartel members. They were poor, vulnerable, working illicit trade routes because legal fishing wasn't profitable. Were they engaged in drug smuggling? Some likely were. But fishermen who smuggle drugs occasionally are not the same as narco-terrorists orchestrating cocaine pipelines. Trinidad and Tobago said 2 of their citizens were killed. Were they cartel operators or traders caught in the wrong place? The government investigated but found sparse evidence of major cartel involvement. Colombia's president, Gustavo Petro, publicly denounced the strikes. He said the operation was ineffective at stopping drugs. Most fentanyl enters the U.S. over land through Mexico, and that the campaign killed civilians. The Pentagon doubled down. Sean Parnell, the Pentagon spokesperson, issued a statement. The Department of Defense intelligence consistently confirmed that the individuals involved in these drug operations were narco-terrorists.
But the phrase Department of Defense intelligence is classified. No one outside the Pentagon can verify it. No court has reviewed it. No judge has signed a warrant based on it. By November, the USS Gerald R. Ford, the largest aircraft carrier in the world, was steaming toward the Caribbean. It carries 4 squadrons of FA-18 Super Hornets, electronic warfare aircraft, and 2 helicopter squadrons. For a drug interdiction operation, this was like using a sledgehammer to kill an ant. Analysis began to circulate that the boat strikes were just the opening chapter. Intelligence officials told Congress the carrier was being deployed for intelligence gathering. The administration had also authorized CIA covert operations inside Venezuela. Trump had confirmed this on record. When asked if Maduro's days were numbered, Trump responded, "I would say yeah, I think so, yeah." The narrative had shifted. This wasn't about stopping drugs at sea anymore. This was about signaling that the Trump administration would use military force,
lethal unilateral military force against governments it deemed hostile. Drugs are the excuse, said Elizabeth Dickinson of the International Crisis Group. The U.S. is signaling that it will use military force against leaders and countries that don't fall in line. By November 2025, America had established something remarkable: a peacetime execution program. 76 people dead, 2 survivors, no prosecutions, no trials scheduled, no plans for due process. The legal precedent is staggering. If the administration can declare drug cartels as designated terrorist organizations, activate the 2001 War on Terror Authorization, and conduct lethal strikes without judicial review, the framework is now in place for future operations, against different targets, in different regions, with different justifications. Former military lawyers warned Congress that this violated the laws of armed conflict. The UN Human Rights Office called the strikes unacceptable. Even conservative analysts said it crossed a line that America shouldn't cross. But the administration pressed on. In a classified Justice Department memo, one that has never been released publicly, lawyers concluded that the military had the legal authority to continue. The details remain unknown to the American public. Congress was briefed, but the briefing was classified. The regional response. Venezuela declared a state of military readiness. Maduro said he would constitutionally declare a republic in arms if attacked. The Venezuelan military mobilized more than 4 million members of the Bolivarian militia. Fighter jets buzzed U.S. destroyers. It was a dangerous escalation. In response, Trump authorized CIA operations inside Venezuela, covert, classified, unaccountable. The military buildup wasn't just about drugs anymore. It was signaling that regime change was on the table. Colombia's president warned that the strikes were illegal under international law and ineffective at stopping the actual drug trade. Most fentanyl flowing to America comes over land. The boat strikes, he argued, were theater masquerading as policy. The political fragmentation. Remarkably, the campaign divided Trump's own coalition. Bannon-aligned conservatives saw it as a replay of the neoconservative interventions they'd opposed during the Iraq War. Kurt Mills of the American Conservative asked the uncomfortable question, if this isn't imperialism, what is?
But others in the administration saw it differently. Secretary of State Marco Rubio was reportedly the driving force, framing the operation as an America First effort to demonstrate strength in the Western Hemisphere. Pentagon brass was quietly troubled. Senior special operations officers couldn't explain to Congress why the military needed aircraft carriers, F-35s, and AC-130 gunships to stop small boats. The disparity between the stated mission and the deployed assets was too large to ignore. By November, the admiral overseeing U.S. Southern Command announced he would retire in December, earlier than standard rotation. Was it a protest? A refusal to oversee what comes next? Officially, no comment. The humanitarian toll. The fishermen killed in these strikes left families. Wives waiting for boats that never returned, children who would grow up without fathers, communities where the death toll was quietly absorbed because these were poor people, marginalized people, people whose deaths barely registered in the international press. Some were undoubtedly involved in drug trafficking, but being involved in drug trafficking and being a narco-terrorist warranting instant death are not the same thing. The precedent set by these 76 deaths is this: The U.S. military can now kill at sea without trial, without evidence presented to courts, without the consent of Congress or the accountability of the judicial system. All they need is a classification marking and a presidential directive. History may look back on the autumn of 2025 as a turning point, not because the drug war changed. The U.S. has been fighting drugs for decades, but because the way America fights wars changed. We abandoned the pretense of due process. We activated legal frameworks designed for extraordinary circumstances and used them as routine policy. We killed 76 people and called it counternarcotics. The question now isn't whether the boats were carrying drugs. Most likely, many were. The question is whether being suspected of carrying drugs justifies execution at sea with no trial, no evidence, and no appeal. If that answer is yes, if we've collectively decided that surveillance and suspicion equals warrant and death, then we've crossed a constitutional line that may not be easy to walk back. Venezuela views the strikes as preparation for invasion. Analysts suggest regime change is the real objective. Congress is divided. Allies are concerned. And the military keeps positioning assets in the Caribbean, waiting for the next order. 76 dead, 0 trials, 1 precedent, and the question that echoes across the Caribbean waters remains unanswered. What have we become when we execute first and ask questions never? This is the untold story of America's new drug war. A story written not in policy papers or congressional testimony, but in classified intelligence assessments and social media videos of distant explosions. A story that matters because it will determine what we do next.